Hello, my name is Professor Shiladitya Rakshit. Child labor. Introduction. Child labor can be classified as the practice of involving or engaging children in any form of economic and on several cases non-economic activities, which may be full-time or part-time labor. This kind of labor takes away the childhood and has several harmful effects on the physical and mental development of a child. The several common reasons for child labor is poverty, lack of availability of schools in India. Not all former work done by a child is considered to be child labor. Work that does not interfere with the education of a child and does not have a harmful effect on their health mentally or physically is not really considered to be child labor. These kind of work include like helping parents or family business, or even for a matter of fact to earn a pocket money after school or during vacations. These kind of work is considered to be something positive for the development and for the growth of the child. The term child labor is defined for the work that would restrict children from receiving education because they are working or would have an adverse effect on the child's mental and physical life. The kind of work may include the following: work that would lead to a degradation of mental, physical or moral and social life of children. It would bring about or would interfere with the schooling of the child, the work that would restrict them from attending school permanently. Even if they are in a school, it would, along with the long school hours, want the children to work for long hours and overburden them. In the harshest forms, child labor would want the children to move away from their families and the kind of work that would expose the children into serious, hazardous work that would further deteriorate their health and lead to several serious illnesses. If a certain kind of work can be categorized as child labor, actually depends upon the age of the child. The Indian laws, like the Child Labor within brackets Prohibition and Regulation Act 1986, says that any employment that is done by children below the age of 14 and 15 years of age in certain kinds of employment is prohibited by several acts, but there is no procedure as such that lays down laws that would define what form of employment should be banned for children. There were no such laws that would regulate the working conditions of the children. And to achieve this, questions was actually asked as why the act came into existence. Though after the years came by, there were several other acts that do specify and classify the forms of child labor. Different definitions provided by several institutions of child labor, ILO, The International Labour Organization defines that child labour can be best defined as the work that would deprive any child from their childhood, their potential to work, and further their dignity, and would have a very adverse effect on the mental and physical development of a child. Labour in this context refers to the work that a child would do and which would have an impact on the physical, mental, social and moral background of the child. UNICEF, it suggests that a child would be said to be a child labour if activities are done by the child between the age of 5 to 11 years. He or she would either do at least 1 hour of economic activity or at least 28 hours of domestic work in a week for children aged between 12 to 14 years. He or she might have done at least 14 hours of economic activity or 42 hours of economic or domestic work per week. UNICEF in another report suggests, I quote, children's work needs to be seen as happening along a continuum with destructive or exploitative work at one end and beneficial work promoting or enhancing children's development without interfering with their schooling, recreation and rest at the other, and between these two poles are vast areas of work that need to not negatively affect a child's development. The India census of 2001 defines child labour as the involvement of a child below the age of 17 years of age in any form of economic activity in which he or she might or might not be compensated or with wage or profit. Learning outcomes. After completing this module, students should know and understand the basic child labour laws in India, why do children work, consequences of child labour, amendments suggested to be brought in child labour laws. The child labour laws in India. After the country has received independence, there are many rules, laws and several constitutional protections on child labour laws. The main purpose of these laws and constitutional provisions is to protect children and from preventing them to abandon from their childhood, also from preventing them from having adverse effect on their health physically and mentally. Constitutional provisions. The Constitution of India, through its various articles, has laid down several fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy that lays down laws relating to child labour. Article 24 says that no child below the age of 14 years shall be employed in a factory or a mine or shall be engaged in any hazardous employment. Article 39E states that the state shall have its public policy towards the securing the health and strength of the workers, men, women and children who are of tender age, so as to check that they are not abused and that they are not forced by the economic necessity to work that are not suited for their age. Article 39F provides that children would be given opportunity and would be provided with proper facilities so as to develop them in a healthy way and in conditions of freedom and dignity, so as to protect their childhood and young age shall be protected against being abandoned materially and morally. Few other provisions of the Constitution provides that there should be free and compulsory education that needs to be provided to the children, which indicates that children are supposed to be at school and not at workplace. Article 21 provides that every child up to the age of 14 years of age should be provided with free and compulsory education. Article 45 provides that the state shall make sure that within a period of 10 years from the commencement of the Constitution of India, it shall provide free and compulsory education for all the children till the age of 14 years. The Child Labour within brackets Prohibition and Regulation Act 1986. This Act prohibits the employment of any child who is below the age of 14 years in 16 different occupations and 65 different processes that are hazardous to the child's life and health. These processes and occupations are listed in schedule of the Act. In 2006, there were several other additions in the schedule. The government included children working in the domestic sector as well as roadside eateries and motels under the prohibited and hazardous occupations. Most recently, in 2008, working near excessive cold and heat, mechanical fishing, food processing, beverage industry and warehouse, and several other occupations had been added in the schedule. The Factories Act 1948. This act restricts the employment of any child of age of 14 years or below. An adolescent aged between 15 to 18 years can be employed in a factory if he or she are able to attain a fitness certificate from an authorized medical doctor. The Act provides that the working hours should be 4.5 hours for children aged between 14 to 18 years and restricts night shift work. The Mines Act of 1952. The Act prohibits or restricts employment of children who are below the age of 18 years to work in a mine. Further, it states that children who are above the age of 16 years are allowed to work only under special supervision. The Juvenile Justice Care and Protection within brackets Children Act 2000. This act in the most recent had been amended in the year 2002 in alliance with the UN Conventions on the rights of the child, which include young people below the age of 18 years of age. Section 26 of the Act deals with the exploitation of a juvenile or child employee and provides that whoever indulges a juvenile or child in hazardous employment and keeps them in bonded labor and restricts his earning or uses it for their own purposes shall be liable for a punishment that may extend to 3 years along with a fine. In many states like Maharashtra, this provision is used to give relief child labor who are otherwise been struggling in hazardous employments. The Minimum Wages Act 1948. This act provides the minimum wage for all kinds of employment in all kinds of establishment and also for those who are working in at home if that work is specified in the schedule of the act. The state and the central government are given the privilege to amend and revise the minimum wages. This act is being used as a very key tool to prevent children who are working and are paid less and receive lower wages than that is provided in the act. Why do children work? This question is not difficult to answer in a country like India. The following are the reasons that clearly show and are the reality that leads to child labor. How necessary is child labor for Indian families? Child labor is a source of income for the poor families. It has been found that child labor does contribute to maintenance of families' economic level, either children working in return of wages or helping out in the household to free the adults from the work. It has been discovered through various studies that child labor makes a very important part of the family income, even though these children work in order to support their families. They are paid comparatively less than what exactly the adult counterpart are paid for the same work and for the same amount of time. Here is where the Minimum Wages Act comes into play. What this act does is that it prohibits the differentiated income along with prohibiting children to work. The employers, on the other hand, take the defense to pay less to the children by saying that children get equally paid like, or a defense like children work is comparatively slower and less than that of the adults. Parents may not really want to send their children to work, but they will surely accept the fact that it is a kind of a need than choice in order to sustain a basic living. What role does poverty play for child labor? The Indian poverty ratio and percentage is comparatively high, and poverty has a direct link with child labor. Families need money to survive, and children become a source of income. In the rural areas, there are families who live in such poverty and yet have 4 to 5 children. All these children are sent to work because only one earning member cannot feed the entire family, and for these reasons, these children, after attaining a certain age, are sent to work. Even though poverty is categorized as one of the most important reasons for poverty, that is though not the only reason, and there are several other reasons that actually lead to child labor. One of the reasons is lack of proper schools that could actually provide free education to the children who cannot afford the same. The other being the attitude that the parents have. Certain parents feel that children should actually start to work in order to develop certain skills and enter the work environment instead of wasting their time behind a formal education. They feel that children would learn faster if they enter and start to work than actually what they would have learned in schools or through any formal education. Consequences of child labor. Having large number of child labor is said to be bad for the economic welfare of a country. To have a growing economy, it is very important to have a more educated sector with proper skills that are needed in an industry. Educated children would contribute to the capital of the country in the future, and if children do not get educated, that would lead to a trade-off of human capital. Children who start to work at an early age are not capable of receiving proper education. Since they remain uneducated, they do not have opportunities for jobs and being recruited in their future. In terms of the physical, mental and emotional growth, these children who start to work off at an early age suffer and are less advantaged as compared to the other children. Working at several places may cause diseases, especially if these children are not working at a hygienic place. Children who take up to work for any reason remain illiterate for the rest of their lives, thus limiting their own ability. Maximum of the children working are involved with agriculture or in some low skilled labor sector, industry, or like domestic helpers. This kind of work needs no education and training. According to the ILO, International Labour Organization, which surveyed and said that there are huge benefits for developing countries to have children sent to schools rather than working. Without school, these children are not able to and will never be able to contribute majorly to the development of the country. Suggested amendments in the child labor laws. The Union Cabinet approved provisions of the Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Amendment 2012. There are certain things that are very important to know in the suggested amendment. According to this amendment, all children below the age of 14 years cannot be employed in any hazardous industry. Rather, they can only be employed in a non-hazardous family enterprise, or they can be employed in an entertainment industry. The original laws had laid down that only in the categorized 18 hazardous industries were children below the age of 14 restricted to work. 2. The amendments have given the parents relaxations from penal provisions. Earlier parents were subjected to the same form of punishment as the employer, but through the amendment the parents would only be punished with a monetary fine if they become repeated offenders. 3. Employers would be penalized even for their first offense. In case of them making their first offense, the penalty for the employers have increased, and it would be some amount between 20,000 and 50,000, along with imprisonment for a term that would not be less than 6 months, and it could also extend to 2 years. If the employer commits the second offense of employing any child or an adolescent that contravenes the laws, the minimum imprisonment would lead to 1 year, and it could extend up to 3 years. Previous laws makes the employer liable for an imprisonment of minimum 6 months, and that could extend up to 2 years if they employed children and contravened the laws. 4. In the amendment, the definition of adolescent has changed, and it has been said that adolescent aged between 14 years to 18 years are prohibited to be employed in any hazardous occupation or processes. 5. Employing of an adolescent in any hazardous occupation or processes has been made to be a cognizable offense, which means that the police can arrest the employer without a warrant. 6. The Act further provides that there should be rehabilitation funds that should be collected, which would actually be used for carrying rehabilitation activities. Conclusion. It can be rightly be said that child labour is an issue and a significant problem in a developing country like India. The rates of child labour in India are very high, and the major reason for such high rates is due to poverty. It has become a vicious cycle. Poor families are incapable of educating their children, and thus these children start to work and never get proper education. Thus, their financial conditions mostly do not change, and their future generations also having to face the same consequences. Along with poverty, other reasons like lack of education provisions is another key factor of child labor, since they are not easily accessible education provisions, which is possibly a weak point of the government, as they many a times fail to provide schools that could provide free and compulsory education to children. Child labor cannot be eradicated or removed by just focusing on one of its detriment. It is a kind of a process, and it needs to have a full-fledged program and initiative by the government and a lot of participation by the non-governmental organizations. Only by providing education, child labor cannot be eliminated because of several reasons. One being that parents who send their children to work have either sent them because they want their children to gain some skills, or because they themselves are not educated to understand that how important education could actually be. Therefore, there has to be measures to help remove poverty, to educate parents, and why there is a need for putting a complete bar on child labor. This has become a cycle where child labor is born in every generation, and this can only be removed by extensive measures and lot of determination through wide programs. It might take several years to do the same. Thank you.